This week we're learning the Simcha for Parshas Terumah, Tavshin Nun Beis. You could follow along with the Simcha and Sefer HaSichos Tavshin Nun Beis, Chelik Beis, page 380. The Rebbe says, Poischin v'bracha, we always begin with the bracha, especially standing at the opening, at the beginning of Chodesh Adar, when there's the command, there's the halacha of Mishen Nichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. When Adar comes in, we increase in Simcha. This is also a month that it's considered that the Mazal of the Yid is especially strong and healthy, so to speak, the fortune of the Yid, the luck of the Yid, if we could say so. And therefore it's understood that Yidden are especially blessed in this time with all sorts of brachos. Furthermore, the Gemara says that just like when the month of Av comes, we decrease in Simcha and happiness, so too when Adar comes in, we increase in Simcha. The Gemara says that because of this, if a Yid has some sort of court case with a Goy, he should try to avoid going to court during the month of Av, because that's considered having a bad Mazal. Rather, he should try to make sure that the court case will take place in the month of Adar, which Bari Mazle, which has a healthy Mazal. The question the Rebbe asks is, why are we comparing, why is the Gemara comparing that just like when Av comes, we decrease, so too when Adar comes, we increase in Simcha? If anything, thinking about the month of Av, when we're trying to increase in the Simcha of Adar, might be decreasing the Simcha of Adar when we are reminded about the month of Av. So the Rebbe says that actually on the contrary, when the Chazal tell us that just like when Av comes in, we decrease in Simcha, so too when Adar comes, we increase in Simcha. That's coming to teach us that the fact that we are decreasing in Simcha when Chodesh Av comes, and we are comparing it and saying that so too we are increasing in Simcha when the Chodesh Adar comes, what we're trying to say is that the whole purpose of what Chodesh Av is all about, the whole purpose of decreasing in Simcha in Chodesh Av, is ultimately to transform that itself, transforming darkness into light, bitterness into sweet, and so to all these negative things into happiness. How do we do that? How do we increase in Simcha and transform the negative things, even of Chodesh Av? That itself is through increasing in Simcha in the Chodesh Adar and having this healthy Mazal, Bori Mazle in Chodesh Adar, which will transform most of the negative things of Chodesh Av. And therefore, if anything, this increases the Simcha of Chodesh Adar. That means to say that in addition to the Simcha that we have in Chodesh Adar, simply for the happy and good things that are good in a revealed way, we also have the Simcha from the fact that we are transforming all the negative things that ordinarily would cause you to decrease in Simcha, but right now we are transforming those things as well, similar to something that the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya. There's a pasuk that Yitzchak says, "Va'asei li mat'amim," make for me delicacies. Now delicacies over here is in the plural. So the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, and the Rebbe is applying it over here as well, that there's two types of delicacies. One is from things that are sweet to start with, and that would be similar to Marbin B'Simcha and Adar because of the happy things of Adar. But then there's another type of delicacy, or in this case another type of sweetness and happiness from things that were originally sour or sharp or hot, and we spiced them up properly well, and they revive the soul. So this has a special geschmack, a special taste, a special delicacy. This is similar to the idea of transforming the inyanim of Chodesh Av, transforming darkness into light and bitter into sweet. Says the Rebbe, based on this we can understand why this particular halacha of increasing in Simcha in Chodesh Adar, where is it brought in the Gemara? It's actually in Masechta Tainis. It's in the Gemara that's speaking about the descent and all the terrible things of Chodesh Av, including the fact that we have to decrease in Simcha, and yet what are we saying at the same time? We need to increase in Simcha in the Chodesh Adar. And the explanation is, as we just said, because this is ultimately about transforming the negative into positive. And the Rebbe says this adds even more to what we started saying, Poischin bebracha, that we start over the bracha. So here we have now the bracha of all the kinds of brachos, both the revealed brachos, but also transforming the things that were originally seemingly not so, transforming them also into bracha and simcha. And of course, ultimately the greatest bracha and that which is most timely, the bracha of the Geula HaMitis VaShleima through Mashiach Tzidkenu, when we will have the greatest Simcha, as the Pasuk says, Ozi Mole Yischoik Pinu, we will be filled with laughter, and we'll also have Bori Mazal, the strongest and healthiest Mazal of the Yidden, and of course also the ultimate of the transformation of darkness into light and bitter into sweet. In Seif Beis, the Rebbe explains, Chodesh Adar, many years, starts off in the week of Parshas Terumah. Based on what it's known that the Yomim Tovim of the year have a special connection to the parashas of the Torah in which they fall. So we need to now understand the connection between Chodesh Adar and what we said, Mishanichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha, and the fact that we say that Adar has a special healthy and good strong Mazal for the Yidden. How is it all connected to Parshas Terumah? In addition to the connection to Chodesh Adar generally, so we also need to understand the connection between the way Chodesh Adar falls out the year that the Rebbe is saying the Sikha. Now, Tafshinun Beis, that was a leap year, a Ibr year. So since it was a leap year, there's 2 Adars. So when Parshas Terumah was being read, it was the beginning of Chodesh Adar Rishon. That's point number 1 that the Rebbe wants to deal with. Point number 2, that year, Rish Chodesh Adar Rishon, and the Rosh is the head, that which leads and guides the whole month. So that year, Rish Chodesh fell out on Tuesday and Wednesday, and this is another thing that the Rebbe wants to explain in the Sikha. In order to understand all of this, the Rebbe explains in Siv Gimel, let's first have a look on some details of our parsha itself. In the beginning of the Parshas Terumah, the Eibishter says, "V'yikhuli Terumah," that we should take a Terumah, a donation for the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash, etc., for the Mishkan, and this is what should be taken: Zav, Kesef, and Achoshes, gold, silver, and copper. Famous question, the Rebbe says, why does the Torah start off by the Terumah, so the Mishkan, for these donations of the Mishkan, first mentioning Zav, first mentioning gold? The Rebbe explains why not. So the Rebbe says, in addition to the general idea that usually you would have thought you would start off asking from the smallest to the biggest, from the easiest to the hardest, and so you would first say that you should give the smallest thing, and then not only that, but give the next thing as well. In this case, it would have been even more appropriate to do so. Why is that? Since we're speaking about over here the donations that the Yidden have to give for the Mishkan, and this is an obligation on all Yidden, and every single Yid should be able to give according to what he's able to give, according to what is the generosity of his heart. As the Pasuk says, "V'yikhuli Terumah me'eis kol ish," take the Terumah from all the people that will donate generously. Now, simply, of course, there was differences amongst the Yidden between the rich and the poor. And clearly, in the donations of the Mishkan, not all Yidden gave the same amount. If that's the case, shouldn't we rather start with the things that are more available to all Yidden, like the silver or the copper, things that are more equal by all Yidden, and only then get to the gold, which that is mainly going to be given by the Yidden that are very rich. The Rebbe says, in fact, when we look at the donations that follow, that's actually the way it seems. All other things that are mentioned in the Psukim, besides for the fact that gold is mentioned first, it actually seems to be very much in accordance to what the donors are able to give. So first we have the Zav, Kesef, and Achoshes, as we just mentioned, the gold, silver, and copper. These are things that generally all the Yidden, or at least most of the Yidden, had and gave from this to the Mishkan. Then comes the special type of wools, the Tcheles, the blue wool, the Argamon, the purple wool, the Toilas Shoni, the Sheish, the Izim, all of these different types of materials, which the Pasuk clearly says only those people that had some of these materials were able to bring them, because not everyone had these things. Eventually comes the Atzei Shittim, the cedar wood. Again, the Pasuk says whoever had it, because here there was even fewer people that had with them these special trees or wood for the Mishkan. And finally, all the way at the end, we have Shemen Lamor, the oil that was needed for the menorah, the special precious stones that were needed for the Choshen and the Ephod, which here the Pasuk says that who brought it? Hanasi, maybe only the leaders, the princes of the Yidden were the ones that brought it, because the regular Yidden, the rest of the Yidden, wouldn't have had these things. Especially, says the Rebbe, based on the pshat on Vahanisiim Heviu, which according to some actually means that it's referring to the clouds brought these precious stones. It was not at all around by the Yidden. The Yidden didn't have them at all. So the question is, it seems to be that with regarding to the rest of the donations of the Yidden, it actually goes in the order of, so to speak, from the most available and the easiest to get to those things which are harder to acquire and that not everybody had. If that's the case, we come back to our question that when we speak about gold, silver, and copper, gold should have also come the last of these, because of course there would have been fewer Yidden bringing the gold rather than the silver and the copper. Even though it's true that all Yidden had lots of gold and silver from the spoils of Mitzrayim and from the Yamsuf, as the Chazal tell us, that there was not a single Yid that didn't have 90 Libyan donkeys loaded with gold and silver from Mitzrayim. Nevertheless, obviously the Egyptians had more silver and copper than gold, because gold is obviously something more precious and dear, and it's something that's available in less quantities, and that's exactly why it's more precious. And therefore, if the Egyptians l'chatchila had less of that, so now the Yidden would have had less of that. And of course, as we said before, amongst the Yidden there were also the richer and the poorer. So the question becomes again, why does gold come first? Furthermore, says the Rebbe, in addition to the fact that every Yid had more copper than silver, more silver than gold, in fact, when we look in the Mishkan, the donations of the Mishkan, that's exactly what we find, how it was brought as well. The Ramban says, the people that brought the gold weren't as many as those that brought the silver and the copper. And the silver and the copper was much more than there was of the gold. And the reason, again, simply is actually because in the Mishkan there was more silver and copper needed than gold, as the Parsik and Parshas Pekudei enumerates and explains what everything was used for. If that's the case, the question becomes even stronger. Why mention the gold first in the donations of the Mishkan? Now, the Rebbe preempts a question. We cannot say that the Torah is enumerating the various different things, whether it's 13 or 15 things, according to order of importance, and gold being the most important, more than silver and copper, definitely. That's why it is mentioned first, because again, let's look at this compared to the other things that are brought from the donations. We have all the way at the end the Avnei Shoyam and the Avnei Miluyim, the special stones that were used for the Choshen and the Ephod. They are the most precious and the most important and the greatest from all of these things, and yet they are the ones that are counted all the way at the end. Point number two, and even more importantly, says the Rebbe, in regards to the donations for the Mishkan by the Yidden, it actually doesn't make so much of a difference how important each item is on its own. Rather, what's more important is the donations coming from the Yidden and the need for the Mishkan. And again, if we're looking about what the Yidden are donating, as well as what does the Mishkan need for both of these things, there was more of kesef and achosha, silver and copper, rather than gold. So in summary, the question based on all of this is really, why is Zav, gold, being mentioned first? Another question that Rebbe asks is, what is practically the Hoirah for future generations from the fact that the gold is mentioned first in the donations of the Mishkan? In order to explain this, the Rebbe says in Siv Daled, we're first going to have a look at a more general question regarding the whole Mishkan, and then we'll come to understand why gold is first. Making and building the Mishkan was dependent on all of the Yidden, as we just discussed. First of all, there's the command to donate to the Mishkan, as we said before, that was to all Yidden. The Yikchuli Terumah, take from every single person, not only men but also women. And as the Pasuk says, Vayavoyu ha'anoshim al hanoshim, that is, that the women came and gave donations, or maybe even came first. In fact, even the children participated in the Mishkan. So that's as far as the donations to the Mishkan are concerned. This applies to everyone equally. Also, the command to make the Mishkan, v'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'soicham, is an obligation on each and every Yid. As the Rambam says, everyone needs to build and help along by themselves and with their money for making the Beis HaMikdash, men and women, just like the Mikdash or the Mishkan and the Midbar was made. So the question is like this. The Mishkan was obviously there to bring about something very, very amazing that didn't happen until the time the Mishkan was built. That is, that in a physical structure down here in this world, there will be V'shachanti b'soichem, the Eibishter is going to come and dwell. As in fact, we have the pasuk where the Navi himself is surprised and wondering. Hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim lo yichal kolucha. Even the heavens cannot contain Hashem. And Davka, this place, this physical structure, is going to be the place where Hashem is going to come down. V'nayadati shamul of Bnei Yisrael, the Eibishter says, I'm going to come and meet the Yidden in the Mishkan. So something very amazing happened over here, that the Eibishter is coming down to dwell down here in this world. If that's the case, in order to build this Mishkan to the Eibishter, the place for V'shachanti b'soichem, for the Eibishter to dwell over here, you would have assumed who should be building this? The most important people. The most chashuv people by the Yidden. They are the ones that have the ability and the power to bring the Shekhinah down to this world. In fact, the Rebbe says, regarding the actual making of the Mishkan, we actually find that who is the one that makes it. We have Betzalel, the pasuk says, Vayimala Yosei Ruach Elokim, the Eibishter filled him with the spirit of Hashem, in accordance to the Hirois, the directives of Moshe Rabbeinu, who had heard everything directly from Hashem. Furthermore, it was Kechoil Asharani Marois, the Eibishter says exactly as I am showing you how to make all the things of the Mishkan. That's the way you should make it. So regarding the building of the Mishkan, it seems to be that the actual builders were very, very special and talented people with special koiches from Moshe Rabbeinu and so on. But yet it comes to the actual donating for the Mishkan and being involved. Here we say every single Yid needs to be involved. Men, women, and even children. So again, the question is, how is it possible for a simple person, for a simple man, for a simple woman, and even a little child to have the koyach to bring down such an amazing thing that the Shekhinah should come down in a physical house, in the physical world. V'shachanti b'soichem, furthermore, that the Eibishter should come down inside of each and every Yid. Something that, as we said before from the pasuk, even the heavens cannot contain Hashem. And now you're telling me that every single Yid could bring down Hashem down here. Especially, says the Rebbe, in V'yikchuli Terumah, in bringing these donations. So Chazal tell us that li means lishmi, that it needs to be with special kavanah, just like v'asuli migdash, just like the migdash is made, it has to be made specially for the sake of Hashem. That means it's not only about physically building, but there has to be a kavanah, there has to be an intention. You have to do it with the right kavanah. And obviously, when we speak about doing things with kavanah and doing things lishma for the sake of Hashem, especially if you want to do it perfectly, it's not going to be the same by all Yidden. Men, women, and children are obviously going to be different. And as the Rambam tells us in Hilchos Tshuva, that the ultimate avodah of lishma, which is doing something just out of your pure love for the Eibishter, not doing it for any other reason, only doing the emes because it is the emes, because it is the truth, the Rambam tells us this is a very, very, very great level, and not even every chacham could get to this level. If that's the case, again, the question is, it's not only about everyone participating in the Mishkan, we're also saying it's going to be negei and the kavanah. Kavanah, there's definitely going to be differences between the simple people and the scholars. How could we then come along and say all Yidden should be equally involved in making the Mishkan and donating for the Mishkan? So the Rebbe says in Sif Hey, the explanation is as follows. The command for making the Mishkan, as we know, comes specifically after Matan Torah and as a continuation to Matan Torah. What happened by Matan Torah? Uvanu v'charto mikolam v'loshoin. The Eibishter chose each and every Yid, and Dafka, the body, the guf of the Yid was chosen. That is, that even as an neshama is in a physical body, in the physical world, he should be part of the mamleches koyanim, the goy kodesh, part of this holy nation, and a nation of koyanim. As it's known, until Matan Torah there was a separation, there was a decree. The upper worlds cannot join the lower cannot go up to the higher worlds. In Matan Torah, this decree was nullified, and Yid, as they are down here in this lowliest world, even as they are in a lowly Gashmiistic place, in essence, what's a Yid? He's always connected to the Elyonim, to the upper worlds. Because every single Yid has a chelik, elikam, mimal, mamish, a part of Hashem literally inside of him. And this part of Hashem, which is his essence, as we know there's a rule, ha'etzem, when you take a part of the essence, you really have the whole essence. So it's a part of Hashem, it's really you have all of Hashem. So a Yid and Hashem are all one. And that's what Matan Torah is all about. Starting from Matan Torah, every single Yid, regardless of his situation, notwithstanding what he seems like externally, we say, Afal Pishachata Yisraelu. In essence, he's always that same precious Yid. There is that Pintel Yid, the Nekudas Hayadus, that we say that because of this Pintel Yid, that spark and that essence that he has inside of him, he does not want to and he can never separate himself from Hashem. And as the Rambam also tells us, that the real inner desire of every single Yid always is to fulfill the will of Hashem. Even though sometimes it seems to be different, that's only externally. Because he has a Yetzer Hara getting the better of him. But deep down inside, every Yid, what is he really? His godly soul. Furthermore, even such a Yid that's holding in the meantime at a level where he cannot be doing things purely for the sake of Hashem, the Rambam tells us a person should still be involved in learning Torah even if it's not going to be Lishma for the sake of Hashem. Because ultimately, he will come to do it for the right reasons. And the Rambam goes on to say that therefore, when we teach little children, or women, or other people that are not on the level yet, whether it's Amei Haaretz, illiterate people, we don't start right away with teaching them and going to the highest level. We start off with teaching them to serve Hashem with fear, with awe. Eventually, when they get to higher levels, we get them accustomed to, and we bring them to serve the Eibishter me'ava, from love. So in other words, originally it might be with other sorts of reasons, ulterior motives of why they're serving Hashem, and only eventually will they come to this level of serving Hashem out of love. The reason is because, as we said, that ultimately from the Shaloi Lishma, they will come and do it Lishma. And the Rebbe says in a deeper pshat in the words Mitoich Shaloi Lishma, Bo Lishma, literally meaning from the Shaloi Lishma, from doing it not for the sake of Hashem, he will eventually do it for the sake of Hashem. And the Rebbe says Mitoich, really the inside of Shaloi Lishma, really the inside of the Yid's Avodah, even when he's doing an Avodah clearly for ulterior motives. But the inside of that very activity itself is really Lishma. Or as the Rebbe puts it over here in the brackets, the inside of the Tachtoinim, the inside of that which seems so lowly, is really the highest of the high. Says the Rebbe, if that's really what every single Yid is deep down inside, he is this Chelik Elikami Ma'amamish, a part of Hashem. As we just explained, now we could understand how every single Yid, men, women, and children, have this command and have this koyach to make the Mishkan for Hashem, and to do it lishmi, to really do it for the sake of Hashem, because through Matan Torah, every single Yid became as if a new entity, the kind of entity that as he's in a neshama, in a physical goof down here in this world, regardless of his level in his service to Hashem, even if it's not yet lishma, we say about every Yid, deep down inside, what is the inner aspect of the Yid? It's all about Hashem. It's all doing it for the sake of Hashem, and not for any other reason. To quote the Rambam again, doing things not because of any other reason in the world, not because of fear that something bad is going to happen, not in order to get something good out of it, but doing the truth because it's the truth. And therefore every single Yid actually has the koyach to cause that even the world, as it's in its lowliest state, could become the highest levels of Kedusha, could become Elyonim, in fact, making the whole world a dwelling place for the Eibishter. Down here, a Mishkan and a Mikdash for Hashem, regarding which the Eibishter could say, V'shachanti b'soicham, that I dwell in it. Says the Rebbe in Ivov, now we can finally understand why gold is mentioned the first from all the donations of the Mishkan. When the Eibishter in Torah enumerates the donations that a Yid needs to bring, he starts off with counting gold, because that is expressing not really the importance of gold per se, irrespective of its connection to the donations of the Yidden for the Mishkan. Rather, what it's really expressing is the chashivas, the importance, the quality, the greatness of a Yid. What we're saying is that the first thing in a Yid's possessions, first as far as quality, as far as importance is concerned, and therefore the first of his donations is gold, the most important, the most precious thing. What do we mean by that? What we're saying is, because the whole mitzias of a Yid, the whole existence of a Yid after Matan Torah, is that even as he is down here in this lowly world, in the Gashmias of the world, a place where the building of the Mishkan needs gold and silver, and in quantity, we're going to need more copper and silver, even more than gold. But first and foremost, we look at the Yid. What is a Yid? In his very essence, he's a rich man. He's a prince. Furthermore, every Yid is a king. And therefore, since every Yid is so precious, every Yid is so special, every Yid is so rich, so therefore the thing that's most relevant and most connected to a Yid is the most precious thing. Zohov, gold. Which the Rebbe says gold, Zohov, is also a Rosh Hashanah of the word Zeh HaNoisein Bori, which literally means this is a person that's donating when he's healthy, not waiting for any problems to come up. In other words, what we're saying is a Yid, as he's down here in this world, he's standing in the highest and greatest way, both Begashmius and Beruchnius, Zeh HaNoisein Bori, he's fully healthy and strong. Furthermore, in addition to the fact that, that by putting gold first, that expresses the quality of the Yid generally, saying he's a rich man, a man that gold comes to first. This is particularly important in the context of Ha'asuli Migdash Shechanti B'Soichel, because the whole way how a Yid could make a place for Hashem, a Mikdash for Hashem to dwell, it's specifically because a Yid, as he is down here in this world, as we said before, in essence, he always remains a spiritual being. He's on the level of Zav. He's the purely best. When we are speaking about, says the Rebbe, as far as the Mishkan is concerned, and what we're going to need to donate to the Mishkan, so yes, it's true that there will be needed silver and copper, even more than gold. First of all, that was what was practically more available to the Yidden. Also, that's what was needed more in the Mishkan. But that's as far as the silver and gold or copper is related to the Mishkan. But when we're speaking about the Yidden themselves, the ones making the Mishkan, there what comes first is Zohav, the gold. Because what we're saying is that a Yid, even as he is down here in this world, first and foremost he's connected to gold. Again, meaning, of course, that spiritual richness that he has, and therefore he has the koyach to make the Mishkan for Hashem. Says the Rebbe, that's actually the reason why the Yidden had so much gold at the time. That is all coming, it's a ishtalshalos. It's all coming down from their spiritual quality. Because spiritually, every Yid is an usher, every Yid is rich, every Yid is on the level of gold. That caused that also down here, Begashmias, they should have lots of gold and be rich in the physical sense. Says the Rebbe, with this will become even more geschmack and more understood that when it comes to Parshas Vayakel, when we're speaking about the Yidden practically going ahead and bringing their donations, the Torah actually divides the division of the gold, the division of the psukim, referring to how the gold and silver and copper were brought into two separate psukim. We first have a pasuk, Vayavoyu anoshim al anoshim, how the Yidden brought all the bracelets and all of the different gold ornaments and so on and so forth from gold. And all the other donations that were brought to Hashem from gold. And then a couple of psukim later, first discussing some of the other things that were brought, the tchelas, etc., the pasuk speaks about those that brought the silver and the copper, etc. The Ramban explains that since the women are being discussed over here, so what do the women mainly had? They had the gold jewelry. They didn't have the silver and the copper. Basically, that gold is a whole separate category for itself, a totally different quality to the other things. Based on what we were explaining, we now understand that what Zav, gold, is really representing is the shleimus, that perfection, that beauty, that richness that exists inside each and every Yid, men, women, and children. And the Rebbe says that's actually the reason, we could say, why gold they all had, the men and the women, whereas the silver and copper, not necessarily so. Says the Rebbe in Siv Zayin, now we could start explaining and connecting all of this to Chodesh Adar, which, as we said before, that in the beginning of Chodesh Adar we read Parshas Terumah. But first, to explain the Gemara that we mentioned earlier, that the Gemara says that in Chodesh Adar, the Mazal of the Yid is especially strong. So the question is asked, an obvious question asked in many places, don't Chazal tell us that ein Mazal Yisrael, that the Yidden don't have the concept of Mazal? We don't go by luck, we don't go by all sorts of things based on the stars, the moon, the planets, etc., etc. So what does this mean, the idea of a Mazal? So the Rebbe says, perhaps we could have tried to answer based on a Rashi. Rashi on the words Ein Mazal Yisrael tells us that through davening and schus, one's Mazal could change for the good. That seems to imply, in other words, that a Yid does have Mazal, but there's a stronger power that we have, davening and schus, and the Mazal could change for the good. But the Rebbe says that doesn't seem to be a sufficient answer regarding what we mean when we say Chodesh Adar Bori Mazli, that Adar has a specifically healthy Mazal for the Yidden, which simply sounds like that it's not about changing the Mazal through certain tefillah, through davening, and through certain merits, rather that the Mazal itself is a healthy Mazal, and we're trying to understand how does this fit in with Yidden not having the concept of Mazal. So the Rebbe explains it in the following way. In essence, based on how high a Yid is rooted up above, as we explained before, a Yid really has absolutely no shaykhs to this whole concept of the mazolis, of all of these heavenly beings and heavenly signs and so on and so forth. As the Pasuk actually says, El derech hagoyim al tilmadu, you shouldn't learn from the ways of the goyim, you shouldn't be concerned and worried about the different signs in the heavens. That's something that the goyim are afraid of. But really, the Rebbe says, the chidush of a Yid is even more. It's not only because of the Yid's root and shoyrish up above. We're speaking about even as a Yid comes down here into this world, into a physical body and in a world of nature. He's coming down into a body that externally seems similar to the body of a goy. And the goyim clearly are sort of, in a sense, controlled by these mazolis. So a Yid is in a place where he's dealing very much with the Gashmiistic world. And yet we say, even not only in his shayrish, but even as he's down here, we also say a Yid is not subjected to these mazolis. And therefore, first of all, as we said before, the Yid has the power through tefillah and schus to change the mazal for the better. But really, the Rebbe takes it a step further, because still, so far, that's still saying you have a higher power than the mazal. It's still not the mazal itself. Comes along Chodesh Adar with a greater chiddush. What Chodesh Adar is saying is that even as a Yid, and in fact even an individual Yid, is down here in this world, and in some way in a world that's very much to do with these mazalois, he might even be dealing with a goy who he's having a court case with, to such a degree that we say in Chodesh Adar he should actually try to avoid it. Yet we say in Chodesh Adar, the Mazal is completely healthy right from the beginning of the month. And even without any avodah of your own, the Mazal on itself is healthy. To the extent that even if a Yid doesn't see it and doesn't feel it, nevertheless, it's actually happening. So in other words, it's sort of going on beneath the surface without even the Yid having to do anything about it at all. Maybe he's not even aware of it at all, but it's still happening. The Rebbe explains this even furthermore if we look into the Chassidish pshat on the words Ein Mazal Yisrael. So Chassidus tells us that when we say Ein Mazal Yisrael, we could also translate it in the following way, that the Mazal of Yisrael is the level of Ein or Ayin. In other words, the idea of Bitul. Ein also means not or nothing. So Ayin actually means nothing. Or the level of nothingness, the level of Bitul, of being nullified. This is the Mazal of the Yid. Just very briefly, this doesn't mention in the Sikh over here, but in some other places we'll say that this is either the sphere of Chachma or the sphere of Keser, which is called Ayin over here, the idea of Bitul, and that is actually what's giving the koichos to the Yid. So the Chidush, says the Rebbe over here, is that this is the case not only up above, somewhere there, that's the Mazal of the Yid, this high level of Bitul, But actually, Mazal is also from the word noisel, which means it drips down. It comes down from above, down below. So that even as a Yid is down here in a world where there seems to be these Mazalois, and he's dealing with a Goy, nevertheless, his Mazal, his bittul to the Eibishter, that's really what the Yid is all about. That's really his actual Metzias, as we said before, that the inner desire of a Yid is always to fulfill the Ratzon of the Eibishter, the will of Hashem, and it expresses itself even in the fact that Bari Mazli, that even his physical Mazal down here, his strength is healthy and strong, even to the physical eye, even of a Goy. Based on this idea of Bari Mazli, that Chodesh Adar means that even in my Gashmi is the things, even in his Gashmi is the things, he's all connected to Hashem, and this has an effect also on all of the inyanim to do with the world, etc. Says that Rebbe, we can now start understanding the connection between Chodesh Adar and Parshas Terumah. And this is in Seif Ches. In the donation and making of the Mishkan, here where it was expressed in the fullest sense that Koyach, the Yidden got by Matan Torah, that a Yid, as he is a spiritual being, he could come down and bring all of that also into his physical existence down here in this world. That is, that even in a place where money makes a big difference, and where possessions make a big difference, it's a physical world. We say, what is a Yid? On the level of Zahav. And what do we say Zahav means, besides gold? Zahanoy saying Bari, that he always remains with that health, with that strength of a Yid. That gives the koyach that Chodesh Adar comes along. In fact, Chodesh Adar, that is, by the end of Chodesh Adar, that's when the Mishkan finished being made. And then came along the setting up the Mishkan in what's known as the Shivas Yemei HaMiluyim, which was the end of Chodesh Adar, from Chav Gimel Adar, Plurish Chodesh Nisan. So this causes that Bari Mazlei, that the Yid's Mazal should be healthy and strong, even as he is in a physical Gashmiistic world. He remains healthy, he remains strong, he remains on the level of Zahav, Rosh Tevis of Zeh HaNoisin Bari. Says the Rebbe in Seif Tes, this is also the idea of what the Gemara says, Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, which in the Gemara comes right after discussing this concept of Adar having a specially healthy Mazal. What is the greatest Simcha that a Yid could have? Is when he knows that regardless which situation he's in, even in the lowest of the low, in a world that externally seems to be the biggest concealment on godliness, and yet he's always connected to the Eibishter. Because even as a Yid is in this lowly place, a neshama inside a physical body, he remembers that he's always a ben yochid, an only child to the Melech Malchei Amlochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem himself, and that the Eibishter says that what is the first possession of the Yid? It's gold. In other words, even in a world where money matters and where physical possessions matter, we say that every Yid in essence is rich, both spiritually and physically. Now we can understand even more the comparison of Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha to Mishenichnas of Mematin B'Simcha, because the Chidush over here is that even in a situation where there's darkness, there's something like a Chodesh Av, which we say Mematin B'Simcha, yet Chodesh Adar has the power to transform that as well. When a Yid thinks about all of this, this brings him to the greatest Simcha, and a kind of Simcha that transforms and changes physical life. In other words, he's living in a world in accordance with the nature of the world, and yet because of the Simcha he becomes a transformed person. The Rebbe explains, the nature of Simcha, of joy, is that it affects all matters of the person. When a person is happy, when a person is joyful, he's living a happy life. He's living a kind of Simcha that has an effect on everything that he does and everything he comes in contact with. And not only that, he brings Simcha to others as well. And Simcha brings Hatzlacha, brings more success in everything that you do and in every part of your life, as we could see practically and clearly. In other words, in addition to the fact that Simcha itself is a great thing that brings someone to Olam Haba, the Gemara tells us about a story about two people that were jesters, there were people that made people happy, made jokes or made people happy, and the Gemara said that because of that, they were zoiche to Olam Haba, they have a portion in Olam Haba. But not only Olam Haba, the Rebbe says, when you have Simcha, you also have Olam Hazeh. Because in this world you have a much more real life, a much happier life, a much more successful life when it is a happy life. Says the Rebbe in Seif Yud. All of this is specifically emphasized when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out like it did in that year on Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, of course, when we speak about the days in the Yiddish and in the week, we're always speaking about the number of the days of the week. According to Torah, we have Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, etc. So Tuesday and Wednesday, we call it Tuesday and Wednesday, but it's actually number 3 and number 4, the 3rd day and the 4th day of the week. So the Gemara says on Gimel Daled, 3 and 4, the Gemara says Gimel and Daled stand for Gemoil Daled, being generous, giving to the poor. So that means that even a person, as he is in a state of poverty, a state of being poor, yet there's Gimel, there's Goimel, there's all of the kindness being poured down and given from above. And that is the connection between Gimel and Daled coming together. In fact, the word, when Gimel and Daled come together, you have the word God, which actually means Mazal, fortune and luck. Or as we said before, the Yid's healthy Mazal, Bari Mazli. And as we said, that the Yid has Zohov, Zanoisin Bari, that he has full health, and his Mazal is healthy, and so on and so forth. More specifically, the Rebbe says this idea of Gemoil Dalim actually represents the special Maila, the special advantage that Yidden got because of Matan Torah. And the Rebbe explains. When we say the words Gemoil Dalim, now we know Dal means a poor person, but there's another word in Lashon Kodesh for a poor person as well, which is Rosh. So there could be Dalim, there could be Roshim. Now Rosh generally means someone that's even more poor than Dal. Rosh represents a lower level, someone that's even more poor. And the Rebbe brings a pasuk, V'lo Rosh ein koil. It shows on a level that's a much greater poverty than just Dal. So the Rebbe says, why don't we say Gemoil Roshim? For speaking about Gemilas Chesed, being kind and so on, why don't we speak about the Rosh, which is again a lower level, or someone that's even more poor? And the Rebbe explains it based on the difference between the letters Dalid and Reish. With both Dalid and Reish is these two words, Dal and Reish, which both mean poor. So the Rebbe says the difference between the letters Dalid and Reish we could see in the form and the shape of the letter. Now, of course, the Dalid and the Reish are very, very similar. They both have the right leg and they both have the roof on top. However, the Dalid has another little bit sticking out behind the roof of the Dalid, another extra little bit. The Rebbe says this Nakuda, this little dot, represents the concept of Bitul. A dot represents the idea of being very small and being nullified, which is the idea that's allowing the Makabel, the recipient, or in the Spherois this would be the Sphere of Malchus, which is like poor, it doesn't have anything on its own, so it's Dal, it's poor, but the Bitul is allowing it to receive and to connect to the Mashpia, to the one that's giving it, and in the Spherois that would be the Sphere of Yesod. And that way you have Gemoil Dalim, that the poor man, or the Sphere of Malchus, etc., could receive from the giver. In Avoida, what is this Nakuda, this dot? This is that Pintel Yid, that little spark of Yiddishkeit, the essence of the Yid that exists inside each and every Yid, no matter who he is, where he is, when he is, which connects him to all of the Hashpois, to that which is being given from above. So the Rebbe says, this idea of Gemoil Dalim, that as a Yid is even in a very, very poor state, in a lowly state, and yet we say, but he still has that Pintel Yid, he always has that dot, that's by the Dalit. That spark of Yiddishkeit inside of him, as we said earlier, that was given by Matan Torah. That's when there was that separation that was removed between the higher and the lower. And Uvanu V'charta, the Eibishter chose the Yidden as a neshama in a guf down here in this world. And therefore, from then onward, the concept of Rosh, of such poverty that doesn't have that little dot in the back, that doesn't exist by Yidden. The only thing that can exist is the level of Dal, which is that poverty, but still with that Pintel Yid inside. In other words, even before Matan Torah, there was an idea of Hashem and godliness coming down to this world. But it would have been then in a way of Gemoil Roshim. What would that mean, Gemoil Roshim? Giving to the poor by the level of a Rosh, rather than Dal. Again, the Dal, the Rosh, the Reish doesn't have that little dot. So that would mean that there's always a separation between the mashpia and the makabel, between the giver and the recipient, the elyonim and the tachtonim. Whereas by Matan Torah, when we got that little pintala, that little dot that connects us to the Eibishter, that allows that there should be that connection between the elyon and the tachtonim. The Rebbe says v'yesh loymar that this is hinted in the word geir. The word geir, which is a foreigner, is a Rosh Tevis, the Rebbe says, of gemoil roshim. What does that mean? Before Matan Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu says, geir hoyisi, I was a foreigner, be'eretz nochriya, in a foreign land. That means to say that because Moshe Rabbeinu is connected to the Eibishter, so therefore, in this foreign land, in a place which is, so to speak, away from the Eibishter, he's a geir, he's foreign to that, has nothing to do with it. However, after Matan Torah, says the Rebbe, it's not even possible at all to have any connection to Eretz Nochriya, to any foreign things. Even as a geir, even as a foreigner, to have any sort of connection to the whole idea of Eretz Nochriya. What does Eretz Nochriya mean? The Rebbe says Eretz is from the word Rotzoi, which means a desire and a wish and a want. So the Rebbe says for a Yid to have any sort of connection to the desires of a Goy is B'chlal not Shayach, as the Rambam passes what we said before, that the inner desire of every single Yid is only to fulfill the Ratzon of the Eibishter. He wants to do only the mitzvahs and to be distant from Aveiros, because every Yid has that Nekudas Hayadas, that Pintel Yid, that little dot that's behind the Daled, in the most perfect way. Says the Rebbe in Sif Yud Aleph, the lesson from all of this is, First and foremost, we learn out that the Eibishter Paskins in his holy Torah, the eternal Torah for all generations and all places, that every single Yid is first and foremost connected to Zahav, to gold. Simply, this means that Rebbe says that every single Yid needs to be rich, both spiritually and physically. Richness in the most simple and literal way. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, not only that that's the way it should be, but in fact, the Rebbe says every Yid already has richness b'poil, and even if you don't have it revealed in a gashmiistic way, it's not because it doesn't exist chas v'shalom. Rather, a Yid has to reveal this through his avodah. And on the contrary, by revealing it out of the darkness, then you get that additional benefit of Yisrei Na'or, the additional light that comes out of the darkness. An addition, says the Rebbe, of lots of gishmei bracha. Literally, gishmei bracha means rain of bracha. In a way of tigboirus achayis, it says in Chassidus that the rain comes down in a strong way, representing in yonim of gevura, but in a positive way. Lots and lots of brachas with lots of strength, so that there's a whole flood of only good and good rain of blessing, but only in a positive way. So that it transforms even any negative sort of flooding to floods of good and holiness, and ultimately as a hachana to Molar, it's Deus Hashem, to the time that the whole world will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, like the water that covers the sea. Says the Rebbe, especially in our generation, the last generation of Golas and the first generation of Gula, after we completed everything already, and all that we need to have now is Kabbalas Pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'poyel, receiving and greeting Mashiach Tzidkenu. Practically, so surely the Eibishter benches every single Yid with richness, with gold, both physically and spiritually, and similar to the times of Yetzias Mitzrayim we're going to have when Mashiach comes, that every single Yid will have 90 donkeys, Libyan donkeys, loaded with the silver and gold of Mitzrayim. In the footnote over here, in number 85, the Rebbe points out, by saying 90 donkeys, which that's the Lashon of the Gemara, the Rebbe points out that we're right now, when the Rebbe was saying the Sikha, in the Shnas HaTzadik, in the 90th year, of course the 90th year of the Rebbe. Says the Rebbe, from this we have the Hayra, the lesson immediately, that a Yid needs to try in every way possible to be rich, starting with richness beruchnius. Ein Osher El B'daz, the first richness is in your mind, richness spiritually, to be rich with Torah and mitzvahs, and also rich physically, so that you can be able to do Torah and mitzvahs in a peaceful and a relaxed way, as the Rambam paskins, and that you should be able to give lots of tzedakah and do mitzvahs with even more hidur, and extra hidur, and generally to utilize the richness, the gold, silver, and copper, to make out of your personal house a Mishkan and a Mikdash for Hashem, v'shachanti b'soicham, inside of each and every Yid, including also by giving tzedakah for building a shul, a Beis Hamikdash in the literal sense, which is the idea of a Mikdash mat, a small Beis Hamikdash. V'oid v'hu says the Rebbe in Yud Beis, and the thing that's most timely right now, building the third Beis Hamikdash in the literal sense. After all the different explanations of Asuli, Mikdash, Shachanti, B'soichel, including the idea that we need to make a place for Hashem inside of each and every Yid, but first and foremost, we have the simple pshat of the pasuk, which is the one that's negeya, that's relevant for halacha lemaisa, is a Yidden have the obligation to build a Beis Hamikdash. And in regards to us, this is referring to build a third Beis Hamikdash, literally, as the Rambam paskins, the Mashiach is going to come and build a Beis Hamikdash. Uvana Migdash b'mkoyim, build a Beis Hamikdash in its right place. And based on the Rambam, everyone has to come along and help and assist, both by themselves and with their money, men and women, like in the Midbar. So it's understood that the same thing refers to the third Beis Hamikdash, that every single Yid is going to participate by his donations, men, women, and the Rebbe says via Shloimar, we could say also children, as it was by the Nedovis, by the Mishkan. Especially, says the Rebbe, that in our generation, the children, the Yiddish little children, were already educated and accustomed to giving tzedakah, in addition to the fact that they are made as shluchim to give tzedakah. So besides for that, they're also given money that becomes their own personal money, so that they could take now from their own personal money and give it to tzedakah. Says the Rebbe in Sif Yud Gimel. In addition to that, we also have the simple lesson from the fact that Mishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, which is in addition to the general halacha of Yivdu Hashem B'Simcha, we always have to serve the Eibishter B'Simcha. And as the pasuk says, Avadet es Hashem Elokechem B'Simcha V'Tov Leivav, and the Ramah Paskins Toiv Leiv Mishta Tamid, a person with a cheerful heart always has a feast. It's always a time to make Simcha. So standing in the beginning of Chodesh Adar, and the year that the Rebbe is saying the Sikha, 2 months of Adar, Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. And based on what's known at the beginning and opening of something as a special koyach, that which opens the channel for Simcha for all of the days of Adar for the whole year. So therefore we have to draw koyches from the opening, from the beginning of Adar, from Mishkan Nichnas Adar, to increase in all matters of Simcha. By taking upon ourselves hachlotos toivas, good resolutions, and bringing them about practically to try in every possible way to increase and add in happy things, starting with things that are on Shabbos itself, that which is permissible on Shabbos, especially that the pasuk says u'v'yoyim simchaschem, the days of your rejoicing, and this is referring to Shabbos. And then, of course, ever increasing in every single day of the 2 months of Adar to add more and more in matters of Simcha, as it's known that regarding Simcha you always need something new, like a new face, to bring more Simcha. So it's a matter of increasing in Simcha and in new ways every single day. And based on the rule that in all matters of Toiv and Kedusha, of good and holiness, the quicker you are, the earlier you are, the more praiseworthy it is. And the more you do, again, the more praiseworthy it is. So how much more so this applies to matters of Simcha, that on their own there's something already that breaks all barriers. So how much more so when Marbim B'Simcha, when we increase in Simcha in the month of Adar. And again, especially in a way when every single day you are increasing and adding in happiness even more than the previous days. And simply the Rebbe says what this all means is that every single Yid should add in all matters of Simcha, both regarding yourself as well as bringing joy to others, as it is known that the real Simcha is Davka when it's together with other people. First and foremost, by adding in Pikudei Hashem Yisharim Samchelev in Torah, in the mitzvahs of Hashem, that bring joy to the heart. That means learning Torah. Both Nigla the Torah, the revealed part of Torah, and especially Pnimiyus HaTorah, learning Chassidus. And of course, learning is meant to bring you to action, so doing mitzvahs behidur. And most importantly, says the Rebbe, that by increasing in Simcha in matters of Torah and mitzvahs, this will also bring about Simcha and Marbim B'Simcha in the simple and literal sense, also in Gashmiistic things. As we said before, that the Chidush of Chodesh Adar is that even in the world, the Yid has a healthy and strong Mazal, as the Shulchan Aruch instructs us about this. And here again, both as far as bringing joy to yourself, also to others, starting with your family, the husband bringing joy to his wife, parents bringing joy to their children in all things that naturally cause them joy according to their own nature, as the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Especially, the Rebbe says, it's important that the father should bring simcha to his children. As the Rebbe says, we could see practically that when a father brings simcha to the children, this is going to cause extra simcha, because sometimes the father might tell them a little bit of a harsh word, because of chinuch, of course, and so on. But nevertheless, it's all ultimately to bring a greater connection between the father and the children, and how much they love him, and so on and so forth. The Rebbe says, so too, it's important to bring simcha to other yidden around you. As we said before, that when you bring simcha, that brings you both olam haba and olam hazeh. Concludes the Rebbe, if you dalud, v'yihirotze, that adding and increasing in simcha will break through all barriers, starting with the very, very last barriers that are remaining from the Golus, and will transform them into matters of toiv and kedusha, and especially breaking through the barriers of the last moments of Golus, that it becomes from the last moment of Golus into the first moment of the Geula, coming through our activities, our actions, especially when we do them through simcha, and especially the avodah of the noshim tzidkanis b'Yisrael, the righteous women of amongst Yidden, that in their schos, the Geula is going to come just like at the time of the Geula of Mitzrayim. Just before learning the next paragraph, it's important just to mention that the Rebbe is referring to over here, although he doesn't specify, but the Rebbe is referring to over here to a terrible tragedy that happened at that time in Crown Heights, when Mrs. Peshalea Lapine, Hashem Yikim Domo, was killed, and the Rebbe is referring to her in this coming paragraph. In fact, in the next week's Sikha, in Parshas Tetzaveh, the Rebbe speaks about that in much more detail. So while speaking about the Noshim Tzidkani Shabi Yisrael, the righteous women of Yidden, that in whose chus the Geula comes, so the Rebbe says especially the Noshim Tzidkanios that passed away lo yoleinu al Kiddush Hashem, the sanctity of Hashem's name, Rachmanu Litzlan. And Yehi Ratzon says that it may be the Eibishter's will, that this should be the very, very last incident of such a type of thing, and of any sort of passing away. And from now on, there should only be long life, arichos yamim, and good years for every single yid, men, women, and children, with good health, especially that we said, Bori Mazal, it's a healthy Mazal in the Chodesh Adar, health, begashmis, and beruchnis, until we will go without any interruption at all into the eternal life, begeula amitis v'ashleima. And her zechus should stand by every single yid, and surely for herself as well, starting with that it will be a kitzu v'rananu shoichne yofer, that is, there will be tchias hamesim, and the tzaddikim and tzidkonios will get up right away, and instead of all of that, we'll only have happiness. Our mouths will be filled with laughter and with joy and praise, especially that we made a hachana for all of this already, and we made a keli for all of this already by having simcha. And at this point in time, when we're doing something similar to Yimoli Yischek Pinu, when we're fulfilling mitzvahs, especially the mitzvah of tefillin, which the Gemara says that especially brings great simcha, similar to the Yimoli Yischek Pinu that's going to be when Mashiach comes. Especially, says the Rebbe, since we are in the doyer of Kvoid Kedushas Moiri V'chami Admunus Siderenu, whose name was Yosef Yitzchak, which is a hint to Yosef, to adding in Yitzchak and the idea of simcha, of laughter and joy, and so that all the Yidden, with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, together with all of their silver and gold, together with all the shul and batei medrash and chutz la'aretz, we will all go to Eretz HaKodesh, to Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, to Har HaKodesh, to the third Beis HaMikdash, and to the triple Beis HaMikdash, as the Rebbe refers to it, the take it from miyad mamash.